when she fought CSS Virginia to a draw at Hampton Roads on March 9, 1862, USS Monitor did not win the battle, but she ended wooden warships permanently. Every navy in the world was watching, and within 5 years, every major fleet had begun building iron-hulled, turreted warships on principles she had introduced overnight. She was called a tin can on a shingle by the officers who built her. Every steel warship afloat today traces its design ancestry to her. She fired the first shots of the Spanish-American War, carried Admiral Dewey to the most lopsided naval victory in American history, and spent the next century in a Philadelphia berth while the battle she won is remembered by every schoolchild, and the ship that won it is remembered by almost none of them. On May 1, 1898, USS Olympia led the Asiatic Squadron into Manila Bay and destroyed the Spanish fleet without a single American combat death. Every American knows the battle. Almost none can name the ship. At the Battle of Santiago de Cuba in 1898, USS Brooklyn was the fastest armored cruiser in the American fleet and was positioned to cut off the Spanish squadron when it broke from harbor, then turned away in a maneuver her own crew called inexplicable and her commander never satisfactorily explained. The credit for victory went to slower ships that finished the chase she had already started. She fought in every major naval action of the Spanish-American War. The history books remember the ships that came in second. Where every battleship before her spread armor evenly across the hull, USS Nevada concentrated protection only where it mattered and left everything else undefended. The all-or-nothing armor scheme that every major navy subsequently adopted as standard. She validated the concept on December 7, 1941, surviving a torpedo hit and multiple bomb strikes at Pearl Harbor, when better armored ships sank around her. She then fought at the Atlantic, D-Day, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. She is the architectural proof of concept for modern battleship design. Arizona got the memorial. Nevada got the war. She was a converted cargo ship with a flight deck that could barely make 18 knots. Her hunter-killer group closed the mid-Atlantic air gap that has allowed German submarines to operate beyond land-based air cover for 2 years. USS Bogue and the escort carriers that followed are credited with decisively turning the Battle of the Atlantic, the campaign that determined whether an invasion of Europe was even possible. The fleet carriers got the Pacific. She got the Atlantic. The Atlantic mattered more. Half the size of a destroyer and armed with guns whose shells could not penetrate the armor she was fighting, USS Samuel B. Roberts closed to within 2 miles of Japanese heavy cruisers at the Battle of Samar and attacked anyway. She expended every torpedo, then kept firing her 5-inch guns until she was overwhelmed and sinking. The survivors called her the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. Her guns could not penetrate their armor. She kept firing until there was nothing left to fire. In 12 days in May 1944, USS England sank 6 Japanese submarines, a record that has never been equaled by any warship in any navy in the history of naval warfare. She received a Navy Unit Commendation and the personal recognition of Admiral Ernest King, who signaled that there would always be an England in the United States Navy. The destroyers and destroyer escorts of the Pacific have their famous names. England is not among them. 6 submarines, 12 days. The record still stands. Declared obsolete before she finished sea trials, USS Omaha spent the next 2 decades doing every job the Navy needed because there was nothing else available. On November 6, 1941, a month before Pearl Harbor, she intercepted and captured the German blockade runner Odenwald on the high seas. The first seizure of an enemy vessel by US Navy surface ships in a generation, in a war the United States had not yet officially entered. History filed it under peacetime operations. She captured an enemy ship before the war started. She was the ugliest aircraft carrier ever built by the United States Navy. A converted collier with a flight deck bolted on top that most destroyers could outrun. Every carrier pilot, every carrier doctrine, every carrier tactic, and every carrier battle for the next 100 years traces its lineage through USS Langley. The first American carrier landing took place on her deck in 1922. She was still on active service when the war she had made possible finally arrived. The fleet carriers got the battles. She got the bill. The only American aircraft carrier sunk by naval gunfire in the Second World War, USS Gambier Bay was not hit by submarines or aircraft, but by the guns of cruisers she was still launching aircraft against. At the Battle off Samar, she turned into enemy fire to give her planes room to take off, kept launching until shells were landing on the deck, and went under, still fighting. She is the only carrier in American history shot to pieces at point-blank range while still conducting flight operations. She commissioned too late for the war she was built for, was too wide for the Panama Canal, was rebuilt 3 times, and served for 47 years, longer than any other American aircraft carrier. USS Midway evacuated refugees from Saigon in 1975, launched strike aircraft in the Gulf War in 1991, and outlasted every carrier built before and after her. She is now a museum ship in San Diego. 3 wars, 3 rebuilds, 47 years of continuous service. Nobody calls her famous. She was the world's first nuclear-powered surface warship, the first to carry an all-missile armament in place of guns, and among the first surface ships to record a guided missile kill in combat, a shoot-down over North Vietnam in 1968. USS Long Beach carried 3 landmark firsts in one hull and was decommissioned in 1995 before most Americans had heard her name. First nuclear surface warship, first all-missile combatant, first combat missile engagement at sea. Last thing most people heard of her. In the summer of 1964, USS Enterprise, USS Long Beach, and USS Bainbridge completed the first circumnavigation of the globe by a nuclear-powered task force. 65 days at sea, no port calls, no refueling stops, more than 30,000 miles covered. Operation Sea Orbit was designed to demonstrate to the Soviet Union what a nuclear fleet could sustain. The Soviets adjusted their naval planning. The operation is documented almost entirely in Navy historical monographs. 3 nuclear ships, 65 days, 0 refueling. Almost nobody noticed. Built as a one-of-a-kind research frigate with a hull designation that exists nowhere else in US Navy records, USS Glover spent 15 years testing pump jet propulsion, acoustic quieting measures, and sonar improvements that were later incorporated into the Los Angeles-class submarine program and every subsequent American nuclear submarine design. She received none of the credit. 1 hull, 1 designation, 15 years of foundational research. The submarines built from what she proved are still in service. Her name appears in none of their official histories. On January 23, 1968, USS Pueblo was seized by North Korean forces, and her crew of 83 was held captive for 11 months. She was never returned. She remains listed as a commissioned vessel in the United States Navy, the only active-duty American warship currently held by a foreign power, displayed as a trophy in Pyongyang while still on US Navy rolls. The cryptographic equipment compromised aboard had intelligence consequences that lasted for years. She is still commissioned. She is still in North Korea. Consistently the smallest and oldest carrier in the fleet, USS Coral Sea was scheduled for decommissioning multiple times across 2 decades and retained each time because no replacement had been funded. She flew combat missions over Vietnam, participated in operations in the Indian Ocean, and launched the 1986 strikes against Libya from a hull approaching 40 years old, completing deployments no newer ship was cleared to cover. The fleet got the new carriers. Coral Sea got the work. On May 17, 1987, 2 Iraqi Exocet missiles struck USS Stark, killing 37 of her crew. The changes that followed, revised weapons activation procedures, updated damage control protocols, new rules of engagement, were credited with limiting casualties when American warships were hit in the Gulf War 3 years later. Stark is remembered as a tragedy. Her legacy is the standing orders that improved survival odds for every sailor who came after. 37 men died. Their deaths changed what came next. The last surviving warship to have been under fire at Pearl Harbor, USCGC Taney, outlasted every battleship and every destroyer that fought that morning by decades. She was a Coast Guard cutter, which is why Pearl Harbor histories that place her at Honolulu Harbor tend to reach her name last, if at all. Decommissioned in 1986, she is preserved as a museum ship in Baltimore. She outlasted everyone who fought beside her. History almost forgot to mention she was there. Commissioned in 1944, decommissioned twice, and reactivated at 47 years old because the Navy needed the firepower and had nothing ready to replace it, USS Wisconsin fired Tomahawk cruise missiles and 16-inch naval shells in Desert Storm, pinned Iraqi forces along the Kuwaiti coast, and fixed an entire army division in place with a fainted amphibious landing that was never going to happen. She accomplished more operational work in 3 months at 47 years old than most ships achieve across an entire commission. She entered service 4 years late, over $1 billion over budget, with construction deficiencies so numerous that the GAO documented more than 2,000 separate defects, and Congress launched a formal investigation. USS San Antonio then became the most deployed amphibious warship in the US fleet, and her hull form was selected as the basis for the next generation of American amphibious ships, extending the design into the 2050s. Congress investigated it. The Navy then committed to building more of them for the next 30 years. Designed for a fleet of 32 ships and built as 3, USS Zumwalt entered service carrying an integrated power system and electric drive architecture the Navy has since chosen as the foundation for its next-generation surface combatant. The primary gun system was cancelled after its ammunition became unaffordable. The power plant survived. Her hull's generation capacity is the specific feature that makes shipboard hypersonic weapons feasible on future designs. Built for 32, cancelled after 3. The technologies she proved are in every ship that follows. She flew more combat missions over Vietnam than any other carrier in the war, and suffered the worst accidental fire in US carrier history in 1966, when a mishandled flare ignited a blaze that killed 44 men. After decommissioning, USS Oriskany was sunk off the Florida coast in 2006 as an artificial reef. She is now among the most visited dive sites on the Gulf Coast, seen by more people annually than ever watched her fly aircraft. She found her audience eventually. They needed scuba gear to get there. She entered service with electromagnetic catapults that failed under load, weapons elevators that could not lift weapons, and cost overruns approaching $13 billion that triggered congressional hearings. USS Gerald R. Ford spent 5 years as the Navy's most publicized procurement failure. Then the catapults were certified, the elevators cleared, and her 2022 Mediterranean deployment was described by Navy leadership as among the most operationally productive in recent memory. They spent $13 billion and got a carrier that didn't work. Then they fixed it. She fought in both world wars, from a hull laid down before the first one, was the first American battleship to mount anti-aircraft guns and provided shore bombardment at Normandy, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. USS Texas fired her last salvo in 1945 and spent the next 70 years slowly sinking in a Texas waterway while preservation funding was delayed. She is currently undergoing major restoration. She fought in 2 world wars. She nearly lost the third one, against rust. She never fired a shot in combat. USS Kearsarge was completed after the war she was built for, converted twice as her intended roles became obsolete, and eventually assigned as the primary recovery vessel for the Gemini and Apollo astronaut programs, a mission no warship had ever been designed for. She performed it for nearly a decade. She never fought. She recovered the men who went to the moon. The Navy is rarely credited for that part. She was among the first American warships to detect unusual Japanese radioactivity on the morning of December 7, 1941, and her warning reached Pearl Harbor too late to act on. USS Helena survived the attack, fought at Cape Esperance, Kula Gulf, and Kolombangara, and was sunk in July 1943 with her crew in the water for days before rescue ships arrived. She had the intelligence that might have changed everything. Nobody listened in time. Then nobody remembered she had spoken. 2 Japanese torpedoes blew 60 feet off the bow of USS Minneapolis at the Battle of Tassafaronga on the night of November 30, 1942. Her crew jury-rigged temporary repairs using coconut logs and salvaged metal, patched her in a Philippine creek over 10 days, and brought her to Pearl Harbor under her own power for full reconstruction. She returned to combat and fought for the rest of the war. The improvisation that saved her is in the engineering records. The name is not.
2 bombs hit USS Franklin 30 miles off the Japanese coast on March 19, 1945, detonating armed aircraft on the flight deck and killing more than 800 of her crew, the highest single-day casualties of any US warship that survived the war. Her remaining crew fought the fires for hours, while the ship listed and burned. They saved her. She reached New York under her own partial power. The ship that should have sunk did not. The crew that should have abandoned her did not leave. She launched the aircraft that helped sink the Yamato in 1945, flew combat missions in Korea, and spent her final decade recovering Apollo astronauts from the Pacific, including the crew of Apollo 11, the first men to walk on the moon. USS Hornet then sat at anchor for 30 years before opening as a museum ship in Alameda, California in 1998. She helped sink the largest battleship ever built. She recovered the first men to walk on the moon. The plaque at the entrance mentions both. Most visitors read neither.